Metamorphosis, Chapter 1, page number 30. And while Grugir gushed out these words, hardly knowing what he was saying, he made his way over to the chest and drawers. This was easily done, probably because of the practice he had already had in bed, where he now tried to get himself upright. He really did want to open the door, really did want to let them see him, and to speak with the chief clerk. The others were being so insistent, and he was curious to learn what they would say when they caught sight of him. If they were shocked, then it would no longer be Gregor's responsibility, and he could rest. If, however, they took everything calmly, he would still have no reason to be upset, and if he hurried, he really could be at the station for 8 o'clock. The first few times he tried to climb up on the smooth chest of drawers, he just slid down again. But he finally gave himself one last swing and stood there upright. The lower part of his body was in serious pain, but he no longer gave any attention to it. Now he let himself fall against the back of a nearby chair and held tightly to the edges of it with his little legs. By now he had also calmed down and kept quiet so that he could listen to that what the chief clerk was saying. Did you understand a word of all that? The chief clerk asked his parents. Surely he is not trying to make fool of us? Oh God, called his mother, who was already in tears. He could be serious ill and were making him suffer. Great day, she then cried. Mother. His sister called from the other side. They communicate across Kroger's room. You will have to go for the doctor straight away. Gregor is ill. Quick, get the doctor. Did you hear the way Gregor spoke just now? That was the voice of an animal, said the chief clerk, with a calmness that was in contrast with his mother's screams. Anna, Anna. His father called into the kitchen through the entrance hall, clapping his hands. Get a locksmith here now. And the two girls, their skirts swishing immediately, ran out through the hall, wrenching open the door, front of the door of the flat as they went. How had his sisters managed to get dressed so quickly? There was no sound of the doors banging shut again. They must have left it open. People often do in homes where something awful has happened. Gregor, in contrast, had become much calmer, so they could not understand his words anymore. Although they seemed clear enough to him, clearer than before, perhaps his ears had become used to the sound. They had realized, though, that there was something wrong with him and were ready to help. The first response to his situation had been confident and wise, and that was made him feel better. He felt that he had been drawn back in among people, and from the doctor and the locksmith he expected great and surprising achievements, although he did not really distinguish one from the other. Whatever was said next would be crucial, so in order to make his voice as clear as possible, he coughed a little, but taking care to do this not too loudly, as even this might well sound different from the way that a human cough, and he was no longer sure he could judge this for himself. Meanwhile, it had become very quiet in the next room. Perhaps his parents were sat at the table whispering with the chief clerk, or perhaps they were all passed against the door and listening. Gregor slowly pushed his way over to the door with the chair. Once there, he let go of it and threw himself onto the door, holding himself upright against it using the adhesive on the tips of his legs. He rested there a little while to recover from the effort involved and then set himself to the task of turning the key in the lock with his mouth. He seemed unfortunately to have no proper teeth. How was he then to grasp the key? But the lack of teeth was, of course, made up for with a very strong jaw. Using the jaw, he really was able to start the key turning, ignoring the fact that he must have been causing some kind of damage as the brown fluid came from his mouth, flowed over the key, and dripped into the door. Listen, said the chief clerk in the next room. He is turning the key. Gregor was greatly encouraged by this, but they all should have been calling to him, his father and his mother too. Well done, Gregor, they should have cried. Keep at it, keep hold of the lock. And with the idea that they were all excitedly following his efforts, he bit on the key with all his strength, paying no attention to the pain he was causing himself. As the key turned round, he turned around the lock with it, only holding himself upright with his mouth, and hung on to the key or pushed it down again with the whole weight of his body as needed. The clear sound of the lock as it snapped back was Gregor's sign that he could break his concentration, and as he regained his breath, he said to himself, "So, I didn't need the locksmith after all." Then he lay his head on the handle of the door. He opened it completely. Because he had to open the door in this way, it was already wide open before he could be seen. He had first to slowly turn himself around one of the double doors, and he had to do it very carefully if he did not want to fall flat on his back before entering the room. He was still occupied with his difficult movement, unable to pay attention to anything else, when he heard the chief clerk exclaim a loud "Oh!" which sounded like the soughing of the wind. Now he also saw him. He was the nearest to the door, his hand pressed against his mouth and slowly retreating as if driven by a steady and invisible force. Gregor's mother, her hair still disheveled from the bed despite the chief clerk's being there, looked at his father. Then she unfolded her arms, took 2 steps forward towards Gregor's, and sank down onto the floor into her skirts that spread themselves out around her as her head disappeared down into her breast. His father looked hostile and clenched his fist as if wanting to lock Gregor's back into his room. Then he looked uncertainly round the living room, covered his eyes with his hands, and wept so that his powerful chest shook. So Gregor did not go into the room but leaned against the inside of the other door, which was still held bolted in place. In this way, only half of his body could be seen, along with his head above it, which he leaned over to one side as they peered out of the others. Meanwhile, the day had become much lighter. Part of the endless grey black building on the other side of the street, which was a hospital, could be seen quite clearly with the austere and regular line of windows piercing its facade. The rain was still falling, now throwing down large individual droplets, which hit the ground one at a time. The washing up from breakfast lay on the table. There was so much of it because for Gregor's father, breakfast was the most important meal of the day, and he would stretch it over for several hours as he sat reading a number of different newspapers. On the wall exactly opposite there was photograph of Gregor when he was a lieutenant in the army, his sword in his hand and a carefree smile on his face as he called father respect for his uniform and bearing. The door to the entrance hall was open, and as the front door of the flat was also open, he could see onto the landing and the stairs where they began. They were down below. Now, then said Gregor, well aware that he was the only one to have kept calm. I will get dressed again straight away now, pack up my samples, and set off. Will you please just let me leave? You can see, he said to the chief clerk, that I am not stubborn and I like to do my job. Being a commercial traveler is arduous, but without traveling, I couldn't earn my living. So, where are you going? Into the office? Yes. Will you report everything accurately then? It's quite possible for someone to do temporarily unable to walk, but that's just the right time to remember what's been achieved in the past and consider that later on once the difficulty has been removed. He will certainly work with all the more diligence and concentration. You are well aware that I am seriously in debt in our employers as well as having to look after my parents and my sister, so that I am trapped into a difficult situation. But I will work my way out of it again. Please, don't make things any harder for me than they are already, and don't take sides against me at the office. I know that nobody likes the travelers. They think we earn an enormous wage as well as having a soft time of it. That's just prejudice. But they have no particular reason to think better of it. But you, sir, you have a better overview than the rest of the staff, in fact. If I can say this is in confidence a better overview than the boss himself. It's very easy for a businessman like him to make mistakes about his employees and judge them more harshly than he should. And you are also well aware that we travelers spend almost the whole year away from the office, so that we can very easily fall victims to gossip and chance and groundless complaints, and it's almost impossible to defend yourself from the sort of things we don't usually even hear about them. Or if at all, it's when we arrive back home exhausted from a tip, and that's when we feel the harmful effects of what's been going on without even knowing that caused them. Please don't go away. At least first say something to show that you grant them I am at least partly right. But the chief clerk had turned away as soon as Gregor had started to speak, and with protruding lips only stared back at him over his trembling shoulders as he left. He did not keep still for a moment while Gregor was speaking, but moved steadily towards the door without taking his eyes off him. He moved very gradually as if there had been some secret prohibition on leaving the room. It was only when he had reached the entrance hall that he made a sudden movement, drew his foot from the living room, and rushed forward in a panic. In the hall, he stretched his right hand far out toward the stairway, as if out there was some supernatural force waiting to save him. To be continued in next video.